Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more Autobiography of a Freedom Writer. We are picking up where we left off in the last video. We're still reading through the first chapter here, but let's go ahead and jump back into this. While I would often hear stories about mistreatments of Negroes, I had never completely felt the indignity of segregation until my second year in high school. My first real life experience made me realize something wasn't right about the conditions of black folks in Mississippi, and it helped me understand what that something means. From the start, nothing was going right that day. Late in the summer of 1954, the memory is so etched in my brain and my bones I can recall it happening as if it was just this morning. It's a Friday, and I didn't awaken at the proper time because I had been up late the night before listening to Randy's records highlights. The radio broadcast on WLAC out of Nashville, Tennessee. At 7:30 a.m., I head out to the house on foot, and because I've missed the bus to school, I'm walking quickly east along the stretch of US Highway 84 that passes through the middle of Lucas. The highway, originally on Indian Trail that added early settlers from the east, is a major highway to Texas. Already the tropical sun beams down oppressively upon me, and I make my way to the local Ball's Grocery. From there, I'll surely find someone to catch a ride with to Prentice, the largest business district in our area, 5 miles further east along the highway. Classes will be starting in minutes at Prentice Normal and Industrial Institute, the private high school and junior college for blacks located just north of town. On my way to hitch a ride at Ball's, I pass Cousin Bertha working in her yard. "Hello there," she yells, staring at me with her hand on her hip. I'm sure she knows I'm late for school, but doesn't ask. "Morning," I call back and nod. The thought occurs to me that she's always working in that yard and must have too much time on her hands. Only she and her granddaughter, Catherine, live in the 12-room house left to her by her late father. The early birds are assembling at the store, purchasing fuel for their cars and trucks, and getting their supply of cheese and crackers to carry them through the day. Running now to catch Mr. Arthur Kelly before he pulls away, I slow down and call for him to wait just long enough for me to retrieve pages of homework that had slipped out of my bag and scattered along the highway. Mr. Kelly gives me a sermon that could have been entitled "Go to Sleep Early and Wake Up Early." That's the cost of the ride, I decide, once he finally tells me to get in and he drives the 5 miles into town. The main street through Prentice, State Highway 13, Columbia Avenue, as it's known locally, is lined with various shops and small businesses. Drugstores, eateries, the Piggly Wiggly, doctors and lawyers' offices. Before we get to the main strip, he lets me out across from the Dairy King ice cream shop. It's early, but already a hot summer day and not too soon for an ice cream cone. I walk up to the front window and place my order. Immediately I am told I am at the wrong window. "Can't you read the sign?" the attendant jerks his thumb to the side window. As I back away, the large white only sign glares down at me. I walk around to the other side where the sign on the wall reads colored. Next to it, a large metal drum used for garbage. It is not covered. A swarm of flies buzzes. I turn to leave the place, letting the flies feast undisturbed and not waiting for my order to be filled. So it was my first independent meeting with Jim Crow. The agitated attendant's attitude, as if I had taken something from him, had shocked me. I can still hear the loud command, "Move around to the side window." I had stepped out of my place. From that day forward, I began to hate all white people. Mother would quickly take care of that problem, though, by reminding me that my grandmother, who I knew little about, was white. Of course, because of the ice cream incident, I understood that there were rules that gave whites the advantage over blacks. Most weekends, I would go with my dad into some of the white owned stores just outside Lucas, where we had to wait until the cashiers finished with all the white people before they took our money. On this day, however, I had ventured into one of these establishments alone, not seeing anyone waiting. I didn't see anything wrong with walking up to place my order, almost tasting the cool vanilla cream before I opened my mouth. What I did not know was, at that moment in time, white Southerners' attitudes toward Negroes were hardening. It was September of 1954. School had only been open a few weeks, and the Supreme Court was holding hearings in Washington on its ruling on in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, handed down 4 months earlier, which had found segregated schools inherently unequal. The ruling came as an affront to the sanctity of family tradition for white Southerners. They had been raised to believe that the Negro race was impure, that separation of the races worked extremely well, and interracial marriage would destroy a civilization. This was an alarm for changes to come. If a number of black educators in Mississippi feared they would not fare well under integration, and thus were reluctant to embrace the landmark ruling, as some historians have noted, the black teachers of Jefferson Davis County were among the exceptions. Not only did my Aunt Mabel, my primary teacher in elementary school, support Brown v. Board of Education, she had traveled to Kansas to serve as a potential witness in the original case, though she was never called to the witness stand. Mabel Armstrong was a fiery, heavy-set black woman who didn't care what you thought of her. She always spoke up for what she thought was correct, not the type to harbor selfish interests. Phyllis Norwood, a former high school sweetheart of mine, worked as a teacher with her and remembers she could curse like a sailor. The perceived threat to job security held by some black educators in the wake of the Brown decision may not have been far off the mark. In the early 1970s, when integration began to be implemented, Wade Sutton, a Lucas resident and one of 4 black teachers assigned to the formerly all white Flora High School in Madison County, was fired for placing a copy of Johnson Publishing Company's Jet magazine on a student reading table. Members of his family said it was a Jet magazine, although records of the State Sovereignty Commission state that he placed a book of poetry containing foul and undesirable pornographic material on the table. In the early 1940s, there were plenty of small one-room schools for blacks located in Jefferson Davis County. Most of them were in private cabins or churches. My first school experience was in one of these. However, many one-room schools were consolidated in the early 1950s. Lucas Elementary School, grades 1 through 8, was one of those multi-grade schools with the pot-bellied stoves and, used for heat. The teachers would be the first to arrive at school. They would go out back, gather wood from the woodshed, and make fires in the stoves. After that, students maintained the stoves for the day. Partly because of this experience, I would later recognize the meaning of separate but equal. The principal of Lucas Elementary was Professor Ernest Lockhart from the Mount Olive community. He was also one of my teachers, a wonderful man. He came to Lucas School after graduation from Jackson State College. He and his beautiful family lived near my family. Even in the early 1950s, he was a freedom fighter. Not only was he president of the Jefferson Davis County chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, he worked he also worked closely with Mississippi State Field Secretary Medgar Evers and President C.R. Darden. He participated in national NAACP conventions. My first intense puppy love relationship was with the professor's daughter, Eunice Lockhart. She was the most beautiful chocolate looking girl I'd ever seen. Her family was friends of ours. We had great times together, sneaking a kiss from here and there. There was a trip to the Mississippi State Fair in Jackson that we had traveled to on the local school bus. That 125-mile round trip wasn't bad at all. Little did I know that would be the last time I would actually enjoy the back of the bus. Not long afterward, the disturbing news came that Mississippi segregationists had found out about Eunice's father participating in national and statewide meetings of the NAACP. Records of the Sovereignty Commission indicate that they began to watch him through the work of unnamed informants. They received word that he was passing out literature announcing an NAACP meeting. The state of Mississippi abruptly ended Professor Lockhart's teaching career in the state. He made plans to move his family to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Since the day since the family lived only 500 yards from my house, Eunice walked over to notify me of their leaving on the day before their departure. That was one of the saddest days of my young life. For many years after that, I thought of Eunice. Her mother had been a really good cook at the Lucas School. Willie Armstrong, a cousin of mine, told me that if he saw Miss Lockhart at school on a particular day, he knew he was going to eat well that afternoon. Well, Eunice moved away with her family. On that unforgettable morning at the Dairy King, I had been on my way to classes at Prentice Institute, one of only a handful of high schools for blacks in Mississippi. Walking the remaining mile there seemed to take forever. When you entered that campus, you felt at home. You felt that the place was yours. You owned it. You were a part of making life better for all blacks, and that made you proud. I had missed my history class. The instructor, Professor J.H. Armstrong, who was my cousin, was no longer available to discuss the Dairy King issue. He was not a problem because he would stop by the house that night with a few shirts for mother to iron. I would speak with him at that time, and when I did, he concluded that I should stay away from that place. No member of my family ever visited the Dairy King again. High school was easy for me. I enjoyed learning and made good grades. I really didn't need to study very hard, therefore. I failed to develop good study habits. I would pay a price for that later during my first semester in college. Day to day activities in Prentice Institute were of the black world. The town of Prentice was of another. What mattered to people in one would generally um, did not in the other. In one world, generally did not happen in the other. The picturesque town with colorful storefronts and crepe myrtles lining the main thoroughfare in the county seat. The courthouse, provincial, bright orange brick with white trim, is perched high on the north end of Columbia Avenue. Midway down the drive, the historic Bank of Prentice stands tall and white with its high porch and Greek Revival pillars. Most of the residents of Prentice are white. Blacks primarily reside out in the surrounding countryside, though they live in the area back if the business quarter or business district known as the quarters. On Sundays, many blacks would come into Prentice and congregate on a designated street corner on the main strip known as Buzzard's Roost, a place comprised of boards nailed together to create wooden benches. It was kept clean Monday through Friday when blacks were not allowed there. If too many blacks sat there during the week, the police would determine that they had better things to do. Saturday was Black Folks' Day to sit on the benches. That street corner would be filled with garbage and trash because there was no pickup on Saturdays. It was a street corner where blacks congregated to discuss next week's farm work. Whites avoided that area on Saturdays like the plague. The white farmers of Jefferson Davis County were the first in Mississippi to vote against uh, beer after its legalization in 1933. With this same standard of morality 5 years later, they refused to sanction round dancing in the community house that had been constructed with Federal Works Progress Administration assistance. But yeah, we'll go ahead and stop there. So yeah, we are beginning. He's beginning to explain his experience with everything that's happening that he's had to deal with. So we're getting more of an example of how things happened and how it's affected, the community in Mississippi. But yeah, I'll go ahead and end this episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.